In order to kind of provide some context for what we're going to be discussing today, I thought a good place to start might be talking about female genital mutilation. Does anybody know what this is? Has anybody heard of it? Yeah.
It's a lot of time in more
Bless you.
cultures. It's not really happening in America or anything, but basically they will sew a female's genitals shut so that they can't have sex, or they remain a virgin until they're married or approved to have children, and basically they can only they can't do anything with their body.
Right. That's definitely one form of it. Not all instances of female genital mutilation take that form. It isn't really practiced in Western countries too much. It is practiced in African countries, in Egypt, in the Middle East, in some Asian countries. Does anybody know what other forms this takes or what it involves? That is one form. Anybody else? Oh, yeah. That's another form that it can take, yeah. Yep. In general, female genital mutilation involves injury or violence or some kind of, what you might say, intervention onto the external genitalia of females. And normally this is practiced on girls very young in life up until age 15. When I describe it that way, when you hear other students describe it this way, what comes to your mind? Do you feel good about this practice? Do you feel like it's moral? How do you feel about it? Tell me. Does it make you uncomfortable?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, anybody else? What thoughts are coming up for you? Can you think of any situations in which a practice like this might be justifiable? It's done for cultural reasons. It's done for religious reasons sometimes. Are those reasons enough to justify this practice? Or do you think it's just barbaric and bad and we should be done away with it? What do you think? If nobody says anything, I'm going to assume you all love it. It's weird? Say more. Why is it weird? Right. And can you think of any health benefits this might have? I hear a no. Anybody else? It doesn't seem to have any health benefits, right? It isn't done primarily for health reasons. It's normally done for culture or religious reasons. But over 200 million girls have undergone this procedure and have had their external genitalia violated in these different ways. Now, when we talk about this in class, as we're doing right now, y'all seem to kind of be disgusted by this, right? Y'all don't like it. Y'all don't seem like you really want to support it. Is that right? Now, what if I were to tell you that there is a similar procedure being done on boys in Western countries still today that people don't really talk about at all? Would you believe me? Do you know what I'm thinking of? Who did the reading for today? What was the reading today about?
Circumcision.
That's right. It's about circumcision. And what did the article say? What kind of argument was the author making today? Does he like circumcision? Does he think it's good? Is he praising it? See some shaking of heads. What does he say? What does he say about male circumcision? Yeah.
I remember, I think you said it was more, so it wasn't really up to anyone else to make a decision besides the actual boy himself.
The kid, right? Yeah, that's definitely one aspect of his argument. He thinks that these procedures that are being done on little boys violates the informed consent, right? A baby boy can't consent to this kind of procedure. So it seems to be illegal on those grounds, perhaps a violation of his human rights, to bodily autonomy and bodily integrity. What about the ethics side of it? Does he think circumcision is ethical? Yeah.
No, because he had mentioned that the procedure violated some core human rights documents.
That's right. Yeah, he's going to be making an argument in this case. I believe he's a child rights attorney, J. Stephen Svoboda. He's going to be making an argument in this case that not only is infant male circumcision unethical, it's also illegal, and it violates the rights of the baby boys that are undergoing this procedure. Now, I'm not going to tell you what to believe. I'm offering you just a perspective on this view. But I think it's an interesting issue to discuss, particularly because this surgery is still extremely widespread today. In fact, there are estimates that say that it is the most common procedure performed in the United States. So I think it's important that we discuss this issue. If it is unethical, if it is illegal, why the heck is this happening as often as it does? And if it's bad and we don't want to do it anymore, how do we change that? How do we change the culture? These are some of the questions that we're going to be trying to answer today. So we began by talking about female genital mutilation, which lots of people in Western countries and in non-Western countries think is bad and unethical and perhaps illegal too. Many people argue this. But few people talk about the male equivalent of this procedure, circumcision. Now, maybe you have some misgivings about comparing them, but I think as we go through our discussion of this topic today, I think you'll see that they're similar in many more ways than they are different. In the philosophical literature, in the bioethics literature, in the ethics literature, male circumcision is not really discussed at all. And Svoboda sees that as kind of a problem because this is a real ethical issue that we should be contending with, he thinks. Now in this piece, his goal is to argue and defend the claim that infant male circumcision is both unethical and illegal. And to do that, he's going to lay out for us various ethical and analytical arguments, looking at various human rights documents. And he's going to try to convince us that this extremely widespread practice, this surgery that is being done to millions of baby boys every year, is unethical and it's illegal, and that we should do away with it. Male infant circumcision is still practiced around the world, but it mostly is practiced in the U.S., of all places. As I said before, according to some estimates, it is the most common surgical procedure performed in this country. However, other countries and organizations are starting to disavow it. It is not nearly as widespread in other countries, nor nearly as accepted in other countries as it is in this one. Now, before we go any further, it might be helpful to define what infant male circumcision is. What is circumcision? What happens to an infant male when they're circumcised? Yeah. Say that again? They take it away? How do they do that? Do they freeze it? No, they cut it off, right? Right. If you ever want to watch a startling documentary on circumcision, it used to be on Netflix. It was called American Circumcision, which goes over ethical arguments, legal arguments against this procedure, and lays out exactly what this procedure looks like and what is being done to baby boys who experience it. Literally, it's a procedure that's done without any anesthesia, and if you've ever seen what the setup looks like, it's almost like the baby boy is placed on some sort of T-shaped rack, and his hands and his feet are cuffed down so they can do this procedure. Now, it doesn't happen like this all the time, but this is one of the ways in which it is done. So maybe even from the outset, we can kind of look at this and be like, oh, maybe that's a little messed up. I don't know. But we'll talk about it as we go through here. Does anybody have any questions so far? Anybody have any opinions they want to share? Okay. Well, then let's go through the different ethical and legal arguments that Svoboda makes against this surgical procedure in this article. Because there are a lot of important things that he says, and I want to make sure to get them on the board so we can have a good discussion about this stuff. The first set of arguments that we're going to look at are his arguments trying to show that this procedure is unethical. That is, we're going to look first at the kind of deontological argument that Svoboda makes against engaging in this procedure, as well as just kind of a description of the procedure generally. So we'll look at the ethics and legality of this procedure, but first we'll take a look at the ethical component. He's going to try to make a case, again, that this procedure is unethical. I'm going to abbreviate infant male circumcision IMC, because I don't want to write it out every time. He writes about the ethics of this procedure on the bottom of page 470 on the left-hand column. Violence may be defined as physical force used to injure or damage in the absence of an appropriate justification or consent. Circumcision is the removal of the male prepuce, I think that's how you pronounce it, which excises between 1/3 and 1/2 of the skin system of the penis and nearly all of its fine touch neural receptors. Consequently, infant circumcision is a violent act. To be justifiable medical violence, an intervention must have the recipient's fully informed consent. An exception to obtaining informed consent is possible when there is a life-threatening emergency for which treatment cannot be delayed. When the patient is fully informed of the relevant options and makes a considered decision to undergo the procedure, the violence is no longer classified as a crime. Informed consent is crucial in protecting patients from aggressive, unnecessary, or unwanted medical intervention and protecting doctors from criminal charges or legal actions being brought against them. The informed consent process grew out of respect for personal autonomy, the ability of an individual to have control over his own person. The modern concept of autonomy is usually traced to the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. He believed that all humans have an intrinsic value that cannot be bought or sold. As such, a person should always be treated as an end unto himself and never merely as a means to an end. To treat a person as a tool to accomplish a goal in which the person has no interest does not respect that person's intrinsic worth as a human. Kant also argued that in order to be a moral agent, a person needs to have the ability and freedom to make his or her own decisions. The concept of autonomy also underlies core ethical and legal concepts of freedom, the right to security of person and the right to bodily integrity. To make decisions on behalf of someone else interferes with his or her own personal autonomy. So even though he does not explicitly state it here, the kind of argument that Svoboda is offering us is a Kantian argument against infant male circumcision. Why? Because the violent practice, he thinks it's violent, and he thinks that it violates the person's autonomy. It violates their free will, in a sense, making them undergo an operation that they are not able to make a choice about, they're not able to be given informed consent about, and for purposes that are other than their own. Right? Do y'all like this argument? Do you think he's right here? That this practice is at least unethical? Or could you think perhaps of a better ethical argument against it? You would say the practice is unethical? What if they don't remember it? Is it still traumatic? Where are the psychology majors in here? How does trauma manifest? Or how does it affect someone? Do you need to be conscious or have a memory of the event to be traumatized by it? I'm seeing a shaking of a head. Yeah.
No, I don't think so. But if you have no recollection of the event, I don't really think you could have feel much about it. I guess.
Okay. Y'all agree or disagree with that? What do you think?
Like some people find out that like really bad stuff happens to them later on in their life. They just didn't know it was bad. And sometimes like your memory will like suppress it so deep that you might not remember like an entire portion of your life because something bad happened to you. And so like it's just, you just repress it. So there's no way to know if you would remember getting circumcised or not.
So, I think actually the suppression of memories is not uncommon, especially for people who undergo traumatic events, right? If it is not processed fully, the defense mechanism that humans end up utilizing is that they end up burying those memories, right? So they don't have to confront them again, because it summons up all of these terrible feelings and terrible thoughts. I don't think it would be radical to argue that being strapped down and having a bit of the skin around your penis cut off is a traumatic event, especially if it's soon after you enter this world, right? If you don't have a lot of experience with other forms of uncomfortability or just experience in the world in general. Svoboda says about this procedure that it's a painful surgery that's done on baby boys normally. We are talking about infant male circumcision after all. And typically it's done without anesthesia. The mobility of the baby boy is normally restricted. They're held down or cuffed down in a particular way. In some instances, the infant is strapped down to a table. And he has his foreskin cut off, right? Or to be more accurate, let's say a part of his foreskin, right? Besides this being an act of violence, Svoboda thinks, because it's not done with adequate justification, it's not a justifiable medical intervention, he thinks that this is at least unethical because it violates the ethical theory of Kantianism, of deontology, violating the intrinsic worth of the person and their own personal autonomy. Now, some parents have their baby boys undergo this procedure for cultural or religious reasons, right? If you're a devout Jew, you will have your baby boy circumcised within a certain time frame for religious reasons. Some parents have it done for aesthetic reasons. They think the penis looks better if it has the foreskin cut off. And then some parents, right, claim to do it for the health reasons of the baby boy because they're under the belief that they're going to be healthier and they'll be able to clean themselves better if part of the foreskin is cut off. Do you think any of these reasons are justifiable? Let's go with the aesthetic reason. It looks better. Is that enough to justify this practice? I hear no. Anybody else? Anybody think yes? Okay, so I'm hearing no on the aesthetic reason. What about the cultural reason? I'm part of a community. This is just what we do to our baby boys. Every other baby boy in our community is like this. This is what we do. This is part of our culture. Do you think that's a good enough reason to justify this practice? I'm seeing some shaking of the heads. How about for religious reasons? Maybe this is a little bit more difficult. What do you think? If you have a devout Christian or a devout Jew, now Christianity does not say that you need to circumcise your baby boy, but Judaism does. What if someone does it for religious reasons? The parents want to do it for religious reasons. Should we make it so that the healthcare system intervenes and says, no, you can't do this because of what you believe religiously? Or would that be an infringement on the parents' rights? What do you think?
Like, I still don't think it's like ethical because they're still violating, that boy's rights, like to physical autonomy. But they're not doing it with a malicious intent. Like they believe that they're
Right.
firmly fulfilling something that like is part of their faith. Like they think like they are helping the baby boy go to heaven or whatever it be because by circumcising them. And it like the same goes like for the medical aspect of it. Like a doctor can't really intervene because like I know Jehovah's Witnesses like they don't take a blood transfusion. They don't believe in that. So a blood transfusion could save their life, and the doctor could do like everything they could to try and convince them, but like when it comes down to it, they can't. So like it's not really the doctor's say to intervene and say, like, well, it could be better, or like just because the doctor doesn't believe in it, like that can't really intervene with like the person's belief. Like when it comes down to it, I think everybody has their own choice to what they pursue with their own body.
Okay, so you think maybe the child's right trumps what the parents want for them in this instance, even if it's religious. Anybody else think that? Anybody on the side of the parents? I mean, try to put yourself in those shoes. I mean, you're devoutly Jewish. You practice Judaism. You think that you're doing something really spiritually good and fulfilling by having your boy undergo this procedure. Now, he'll probably not remember it, right? I doubt you'll find many boys who remember their circumcision at all. So is it really so bad? If you were tortured, let's say for a day 10 years ago, and you don't remember it, is it really that bad? You still think so? Yeah? Even if you have no memory of it.
I mean, it's still...
You can't remember the pain, you can't remember the torment.
It still happened, though.
It still happened, that's right. It still happened. It still did inflict pain, arguably, right? And suffering. Does your opinion on circumcision change if we don't talk about baby boys? If we talk instead about 18-year-old boys who are making their own decision about what to do? Maybe they haven't been circumcised. Their parents decided not to do that. And now, they're trying to make the decision if they want to have a circumcision or not. Does your opinion change? If so, why? Yeah.
My opinion does change because now, since they're older, they're conscious enough to make their decisions for themselves, and it doesn't affect anyone else besides themselves. So they should do it.
Okay. Yeah, so they're old enough and they're mature enough. They've been thinking it through, and they're exercising their own right to bodily autonomy, right? To do what they want with their body. Do y'all accept this? Do you think, yeah, this makes sense? There's nothing wrong in this instance with somebody deciding to do that to themselves? Could it still be legal if an 18-year-old boy decided to be circumcised himself, but unethical still? Even if he was doing it to himself? Or, he decided to have the procedure done?
I wouldn't think so, because wouldn't that make him happy in a way? Because he's deciding to do it, not his own parents. So like, as someone who's like a borderline atheist, for me it's just like I don't really respect anyone that does something for a religious standpoint to a child, specifically a newborn baby. So I feel like if he's 18 years old, he's conscious, he knows what he wants to do, and if him getting circumcised leads him to the path of God, that's great for him. I'm happy for him. But as long as he's making that conscious decision and not his parents, that's where I feel like, okay, ethical. If you want to do it, you're 18 years old, you're old enough to make that decision by yourself. I feel like that's ethical in my opinion.
Okay. What were you gonna say, Peyton?
I feel like the only grounds that like he had for the unethical reason was because they were an infant and they couldn't give informed consent. But like if they're like 18 and can give that consent, I don't think there's any argument against it being unethical. Like, what would that even look like?
Okay, well, let me give you another example. If I come to class one day and I'm like, class, I've just been really thinking about my life, and I would be so much happier if I just cut my left arm off. I just really want to have it amputated. Would that be ethical for me to do?
Do what you gotta do, I guess.
Yeah.
I believe yes, because it affects no one else besides you. So you are the full master of your own body, and you want to do that, you can do it.
If I want to do it, I can do it, right? There aren't any legal problems with that. I doubt, somebody would amputate my arm without a good reason, unless, I do it in a back alley somewhere. But we can view kind of this lens and the amputation lens, or the amputation case, through the lenses of the different theories that we've been looking at, right? On utilitarian grounds, let's look at the 18-year-old case of circumcision. Would that be ethical? It produces some amount of happiness for the person who's undergoing the procedure, right? If this is what they want to do. Does it affect society in any way? Who else would this procedure affect, if anyone? How about their sexual partners? It would affect them somehow. Now, positively or negatively would seem to depend on the sexual partner, right? But it doesn't just affect the person undergoing the procedure, right? So that might need to be considered if we're trying to be utilitarians. What about according to virtue theory? This one's a little harder. Would this procedure be ethical according to virtue theory? Is it helping the person cultivate the virtues? Is it done from having the virtues? I think this one's a little harder because I think it would depend on a case-by-case basis. If I decided to get circumcised when I was 18 because I'm really worried that my parents would hate me if I don't do it, and I'm kind of bending to their will and I'm being a little cowardly, then what I'm not doing is virtuous, right? I'm not being brave, I'm not being courageous. If I'm just doing it because somebody else wants me to do it and I'm not doing it to strengthen myself or make myself wiser, or I'm not doing it from a space of courage and honesty. On the other hand, maybe a procedure like this may increase my quality of life. It might make me braver. Maybe I see this as an opportunity, to endure pain or something like that. And I'm like, maybe that's a weird case though, I don't know. What about the ethics of care? Is doing this on a baby boy caring to them? Would that strengthen or deepen the parents' relationships with the boy?
In the case of a religious reason, I feel like it wouldn't cultivate anything because, let me think about it. If you do it for a religious reason and then your kid grows up and is like, I don't subscribe to that religion, then every day they're going to wake up and be like, my mom mutilated me for God or something like that.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Do you think this being done on a baby boy, though, is, does it exemplify care? Maybe it's done with good intentions, right? Yeah.
The only way I could see it is if, like, culturally, the baby was, like, accepted by other people in that religion. It would strengthen the relationship there. That's like,
Like an initiation into a certain community that's gonna, watch over them and look out for them and give them a place where they can express their feelings, figure out the world. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So I think a lot of different arguments could be made based on these different views of whether this is ethical or unethical. But I think the case primarily turns on whether the child has a say in this. Right? Because y'all seem fine to say if an 18-year-old wanted to have this procedure done and they decided that, that's fine. But the fact that this is being done to children that can't consent to it, y'all don't seem to like that. Right? Y'all think there's something a little icky with that, maybe? This leads us into the next set of arguments that Svoboda gives against this procedure. And that's that he thinks it's not only unethical, it's illegal. It violates the human rights of these baby boys. And he talks about this on pages 472 to 473. And he goes through a bunch of human rights documents to provide a case that this is an illegal practice. This is at the bottom page, 472. Infant male circumcision needlessly exposes the child's body to physical assault, short-term and long-term harm, and loss of functional tissue without medical justification or valid parental permission. Accordingly, rights under the UDHR, the ICCPR, and the CRC to privacy, to life, to liberty, to security of person, and to physical integrity are violated by circumcision. The UDHR safeguards privacy rights and guarantees that, quote, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, unquote. ICCPR Articles 9 and 17 and CRC Article 16 contain parallel provisions, making similar guarantees. As Robert Ludbrook notes, quote, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which receives and comments on the reports filed by parties to the convention, recognizes the convention as granting children a right to physical integrity. Such a right is violated by infant male circumcision. Arbitrary or unlawful interference with privacy occurs in neonatal circumcision when a child's genitals are altered without valid medical justification and without consent of the individual. The right to life guaranteed by these three core human rights documents in UDHR Article 3, ICCPR Article 6, and CRC Article 6 is also needlessly placed at risk by circumcision. Bollinger estimates that at least 100 infant males die as a consequence of circumcision each year in the USA. UDHR Article 29 is widely interpreted to prohibit interference with physical integrity. Circumcision constitutes a violation of privacy and of physical integrity. Under CRC Article 19.1, it's states must take all measures to ensure that no violence, injury, or abuse occurs while the child is under the care of a parent or legal guardian. The USA fails to take all measures to ensure that no violence, injury, or abuse occurs in violation of this article, and effectively promotes, by financially supporting those who perform the procedure, and condones this violence, injury, or abuse caused by neonatal circumcision. Article 37b of the CRC provides, quote, no child shall be deprived of his or her liberty unlawfully or arbitrarily, unquote. Neonatal circumcision requires the temporary deprivation of a child's liberty by physically restraining him in order to carry out the procedure. Article 24 of the CRC specifically addresses health issues. Section 1 obligates state parties to recognize the child's right to enjoy the highest attainable standard of health. Section 2 requires states to pursue full implementation of the child's right to enjoy the highest attainable health standard, and to take appropriate measures to, among other things, diminish infant and child mortality. Section 3 requires states to take all effective and appropriate measures with a view to abolishing traditional practices prejudicial to the health of children. Moving forward, the USA tolerates male circumcision while simultaneously outlawing forms of female genital cutting that remove no tissue and thus are less invasive and cause less damage than male circumcision, which removes up to half of the penis's surface tissue. UDHR Article 2, ICCPR Article 24.1, and CRC Article 2 ensure the child's right to all appropriate protection without regard to sex. Infant male circumcision, as is evident from the very terminology, discriminates on the basis of sex, also thereby violating constitutional guarantees of equal protection. And then he goes on to argue that infant male circumcision arguably fits the definition of torture, and that it can cause severe pain and it is intentionally inflicted. The points of debate are whether it is based on discrimination of any kind and whether it is inflicted by someone acting in an official capacity. It is discriminatory, he says, based on sex. Such acts on females are explicitly illegal. Doctors are licensed by the state but are not usually acting in an official capacity. So it's not clear whether doctors employed by the government, such as those in the armed forces, would be exempt. There are also circumcisions performed by unlicensed individuals. Finally, in most states, infant male circumcision fits the statutory definition for child abuse. Consequently, it could be argued that infant male circumcisions performed by government employees in states where circumcision is not listed as a specific exception to their child abuse statutes would fit the international definition of torture. So he's making a case here that not only is circumcision illegal, that it violates the rights of these baby boys, but that arguably, under the international definition, it could constitute as child abuse and perhaps torture. What do y'all think? Is he being a little extra here, or do you think he's right? First of all, do you think this practice is illegal? Let's talk about that. Does it violate the rights of the baby boy? It's another question. What do you think? I'll wait. Enjoy my coffee. Yeah.
I don't think it's illegal, cause like if you think about it, like a ton of like medical procedures are done on children, but it's not like they can be like, yeah, go ahead, give me whatever surgery. I don't know. I feel like it's not illegal.
Okay.
Maybe unethical, but not illegal.
What kinds of operations do we normally accept or find to do on children that they can't consent to?
Like surgeries that like prevent like cancer or things of like that nature, like that saves their life in a sense.
Life-saving treatment, right? Yeah, what were you gonna say?
Like my sister, when she was younger, she couldn't hear very well, so we got her ear tubes so that she could hear, but like she could like be okay without it, and it's not like she consented to having surgery to get tubes in her ears.
So do you think that wasn't illegal to do that, even though it violated
Yeah.
the informed consent? Okay. Now it's clear that children can't really, especially if they're really young, they can't really have informed consent of any surgical procedure, right? But practically, it does seem like we make an exception to that if it involves life-saving treatment. Although that was a rare exception as well, right? So part of Svoboda's argument is that there's no medical justification for this procedure. Not only because it doesn't constitute life-saving treatment, but also because it physically harms the child when it comes to pain and suffering, and it also removes a lot of neural receptors on the penis that help stimulate sexual pleasure. So if you take a look at the documentary that I mentioned earlier, they actually go into this a little bit about how boys who have not had circumcisions are able to experience sexual pleasure that boys who have had them are not able to experience because of the removal of these neural receptors on the penis, which is kind of interesting. But one of the main points that he's trying to make here, and in this he's really trying to drive home how kind of barbaric he thinks this is he compares it to some forms of female genital mutilation, which kind of internationally is agreed by most well-developed countries is immoral and illegal. He compares infant male circumcision to cases of female genital cutting, which are less invasive and cause less damage, but are still condemned as conflicting with human rights. He says the case is obvious when we look at female genital cutting and female genital mutilation, but there's an inconsistency here. We're not applying the same ethical and legal standards to infant male circumcision, right? He says obviously there's something going wrong here. He thinks that yeah.
I just Googled it, and in a review of studies, the conclusion they came to is, quote, the highest quality studies suggest that medical male circumcision has no adverse effect on sexual function, sensitivity, sexual sensation, or satisfaction.
Okay. So that's a piece of evidence against the idea of the sexual pleasure point that I made earlier, right? So maybe it doesn't do that.
And generally most circumcisions are done with like a topical ointment that numbs the area, or just with general anesthesia, like specifically infant circumcisions.
Okay.
If you're an adult, you get put under general anesthesia.
Okay. So there again, we have cases in which there is actually some sort of anesthetic that's used. Do we think that alters the ethicality of the procedure or the legality? I know you said you don't think it's illegal. Does anybody think it is illegal?
I mean, so like in the United States, like they refuse to sign off on like the rights of the treaty for the rights of a child. So like America doesn't really care about what they do to children at this point, because a lot of people are just like, we should have the rights to our child. They don't know what to do. Like they're young. A lot of people like from the right think that, but like I feel like it is illegal. I mean, at the same time, like any child that's under the age of 18, like they're still like a human being. I feel like they should be able to consent for something that's like violating their like privacy. Like I feel like it's kind of messed up.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that. So in the article, Svoboda tries to argue the claim that infant male circumcision not only implicitly violates the 4 pillars of bioethics, but then he also kind of states explicitly what this procedure he thinks does violate, which rights he does think it violates of the child. So he thinks that it's not just one right that's actually being violated here. He brings up several rights that we as human beings have that are often discussed within the field of bioethics and healthcare. And he thinks that all of what I'm going to list here violates the human rights of these infants. The first we've already talked about. Informed consent. When it comes to adults undergoing medical procedures, one of the rules that healthcare practitioners have to follow is they have to give the patient informed consent about the procedure. The patient has to understand what is going to be done to them, the consequences of it, the risks and benefits, and so on. Now, children can't do that. They can't understand what's happening to them. They can't understand the risks and the benefits. But we do allow exceptions to establishing informed consent. The most obvious case is in terms of life-saving treatment. If a baby is going to die, it doesn't matter that they can't consent, right? Saving their life overrides establishing informed consent, which is impossible anyway. Or perhaps when it has to do with a procedure that would have a significant impact on their life or their ability to perceive and operate within the world. But Svoboda thinks it doesn't just violate this right, it also violates the right to bodily autonomy. This right has to do with, or is associated with, the free will of the person to make their own choices, to make their own decisions. It would be improper and unethical and probably illegal to force someone to have a medical procedure that they understand and that they do not want to undergo. The case that was brought up earlier has to do with blood transfusions or even other forms of life-sustaining treatment. Patient autonomy is a central pillar in bioethics. And even if a patient doesn't want life-saving treatment, the doctors in most cases have to respect that. And they can't force them to have their own life saved. Closely related to bodily autonomy are the rights of bodily integrity and bodily liberty. Now this is where it starts to get a little messy. It's a little confusing, the differences between these things. The right to bodily integrity has to do with control over one's own body. What happens to one's own body? Having some sort of right over what happens to one's body. And what one wants to do with one's body. Svoboda also thinks this violates the right to bodily liberty. Which basically is a right associated with It's a little hard to explain, but it's often brought up in discussions around experimentation, undergoing certain psychological or physical experiments. Basically, it is associated with these rights, but it has to do with being the person who decides whether or not you undergo some sort of event or procedure. Again, these rights are all kind of closely associated, so they're kind of hard to pick apart. But normally this is brought up within cases of experimentation, because it's said that, if you just experiment willy-nilly on people who don't have a say or a choice in the matter, that violates their right to bodily liberty, because they didn't consent to be an experiment, something that is experimented upon. Svoboda also thinks that this procedure is discriminatory because it's based on sex. It's based on a protected characteristic. Oh, what do y'all think about that? Is he right? Is he wrong? Yeah.
Well then, is that specifically for children, or is it for everyone? Because then, if it's for everyone, then it would apply somebody with a uterus getting a C-section is discriminatory because people without a uterus can't get a C-section.
I see what you're saying, but I think his overall argument is it's discriminatory based on sex, not because the patient happens to be male, but because involved in the procedure and the thoughts and the processes surrounding the procedure is an explicit connection to the sex of the child. So, let's say, for example, you believe that a trans man can get pregnant and give birth, and he needs a C-section. I think Svoboda would say that's not discriminatory based on sex, but infant male circumcision is discriminatory based on sex because it has nothing to do with what the gender of the child is when this procedure is undergone or anything like that. Or the person involved in the operation, their sex is not an accident in the situation. It's a core feature of maybe why the procedure is done or to whom the procedure is done to. So it's kind of a weird argument, I guess. But maybe it being discriminatory based on sex, if it is, doesn't really matter in the first place. I don't know. We're not supposed to discriminate based on sex or race or any other protected characteristic when it comes to loans, when it comes to housing, education, occupation, and so on. But maybe you just fundamentally disagree that it's not discriminatory based on sex, because only baby males undergo it. Maybe you think that's just an accident of the situation, or
wouldn't that be in reference to the fact that it's mostly how you were saying there's female genital cutting, but people don't accept that, and how it should be even.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that also plays a role. It seems to be that female genital cutting or mutilation is mostly condemned and mostly seen as a violation of human rights. But yeah, when it comes to baby males, the attitude is different, like you said. Maybe that does constitute a form of discrimination. I don't know. Something to think about, I guess. Finally, he thinks that when you look at the nitty-gritty of these operations, that based on some human rights documents, infant male circumcision could fit definitions for torture and child abuse. Sorry, you can't read this. Now, do you think he is making a mountain out of a molehill here? Or do you think he's right? Life-sustaining treatment would be one thing, right? But it does not seem that this procedure is necessary for the health of the child. I wonder if you could find any evidence about whether it actually does have any health benefits. I'm not sure it does. So it seems like it's an unnecessary operation. Would that fit the definition of child abuse?
It says it might prevent against HIV and like various. Let me just Google it again.
Yeah.
It was like a might.
Might.
So I have no idea.
Does anybody know? Has anybody done research into this topic? Yeah.
I know that it gives them lesser risk for getting UTIs, and if it recurs, they end up having to get the foreskin removed in the future anyways, as preventative measure.
Okay, so here's a question. Does it allow boys into the future less risk of getting UTIs because of the intrinsic nature of the procedure, or because of the actions or inactions of the boys themselves? You see what I'm saying? So like, if boys just aren't taught to clean their penis properly, like of course they're going to get UTIs, right? But I don't know, maybe a case could be made that, yeah, it does decrease risk of UTIs, but that's just because boys are dirty and gross, and, you know, that's getting a circumcision means that they have to clean less and has access to the air and all these things. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. But what do you think? Do you think this... Well, let's start with torture. Maybe that's an easier one. Do you think this fits the definition of torture? Or is Svoboda being a little extra here?
I think it's a little extra.
You think so?
Yeah. It's just, I never really thought about circumcision into that deep, but it's like, to me, it kind of seems like the removal of a wart. You know, like you can live with it, or you can choose to get it removed. Like, it's not that deep. In my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily torture, because isn't it like a quick process at the end? Not quick.
I'm not sure how quick it is. I guess it would vary from child to child.
I don't.
But yeah, I don't think it takes that long.
Yeah, I think if it was truly torture, it would probably be like extended amount of time, because torture techniques, you know, I feel like they take longer, maybe hours and stuff to do that.
Maybe it's prolonged. Maybe when we think of torture, the person is intending to bring suffering, right, to the victim. I'm not sure the doctor or the parents are intending to bring suffering to the baby boy here, right? Usually we regard their intentions as good, right? They're trying to do something they think is good, or something that will allow that constitutes an initiation into a community, or that will help them spiritually, or something like that. What about abuse? Would this procedure constitute child abuse? Yeah.
Yes.
Can you say why? Why do you think that?
Technically speaking, it's abusing the power that it is a child, so they have no say so in what happens to them. So I feel like it is technically classified as child abuse.
Okay. Yeah.
Then is getting your tonsils out when you're young still, is that child abuse too?
That's a great question. What do y'all think? Are you? Are you under anesthesia during that procedure? I don't know. What is the purpose of doing that procedure?
To prevent getting strep throat. Like if you get it constantly, they'll say, oh, you should probably get your tonsils out. Probably. Like your parents can choose to get your tonsils out. And like strep throat isn't like life-threatening. It's just something that you can prevent. And if circumcision is to prevent urinary tract infections, then it's preventative. They recommend that you get a circumcision. I just Googled it. If your family has increased risk of UTIs. So, like, if your family has increased risk to strep throat, then you should probably get your tonsils out.
Do we think these cases are analogous enough to make the argument that infant male circumcision is not abuse? This kind of goes back to what I was trying to say earlier, but I didn't really put it very well. I think there is a difference between the tonsil removal and the circumcision in the following way. If your tonsils get inflamed a lot, let's say, they are the cause for the strep throat or whatever throat ailment that you have, right? So if you get them removed, you're getting rid of the strep, right? You're removing the cause of the strep. But what is the cause of boys or men getting UTIs? Is their foreskin the cause, or is their lack of proper hygiene the cause? Do you see the difference? You're not removing, in the circumcision case, you're not removing the cause of these things. You're engaging in a procedure that, I don't know, makes it more likely that perhaps, due to poor hygiene practices, you're not going to get something bad. So while it is preventative, it's not directly preventative in the same way that the tonsil removal is. You see what I mean? But I think that's a good case, because they are similar. And again, based on what we've been talking about, it's not entirely clear what health benefits, if any, there are from the circumcision cases. There might be some, right? I guess we'll have to look at the data and see if there actually are positive benefits to this. Does anybody think it's not child abuse? Does anybody think it is child abuse? Yeah. Anybody else? In any case, I think Svoboda gives us a lot to think about in this article. We could look at this issue also through the lens of bioethics. So, one of the cases that Svoboda is also making here is that this procedure arguably violates what are called the 4 pillars of bioethics. Does anybody know what these are? Anybody in the medical field, studying medicine, studying bioethics? The first one's pretty easy. We've been talking about it before. Autonomy. When it comes to medical procedures, the bioethics community doesn't think it's appropriate to force someone to get a procedure if they don't want to do it. in a lot of cases. Maybe there are some exceptions. The second is justice. The third is beneficence, doing good where you can. And the last one is non-maleficence, just not doing bad things. It's reminiscent of the Hippocratic Oath, right? First, to do no harm. Now, in cases of infant male circumcision, right, we know that the autonomy is violated. But maybe that's not a problem. So let's go on to the next one. Is it just? Do we think this procedure helps establish justice? This one's a little trickier. I mean, what exactly do we mean by justice? We talk about personal justice, social justice. Not exactly sure how this procedure would help establish justice. It's not entirely clear to me, though, that it's unjust. Maybe it is? What do you think? Is this procedure unjust? There's a famous conception of justice put forth by the political theorist John Rawls in his book, Justice as Fairness. So maybe we could think about it that way. Is this fair? Is this procedure fair? Is it fair? Y'all are asleep today. Anybody? Is it fair? Is it just? However you want to look at it. What do you think? Yeah.
Apparently justice in healthcare is basically fair distribution of goods in society and requires that we look at the role of entitlement.
Okay.
So I don't know how that applies, but I feel like it's more like, are you treating somebody in a lower class than somebody of higher class?
Right. Fair distribution of like medical treatment, right? Might be a good example. All right, so let's put a question mark on this. Is it beneficent? Is it good? Are you doing something good for the child? Depends on the evidence, maybe. Depends on whether or not this actually does anything to prevent disease, or whether it's just a traumatic procedure. Is it maleficent? Is it bad? Is it kind of evil, injurious? Are we, or to put it a better way, are we doing harm to the child? Is the child harmed? It's interesting you use that word because there is a part of them that will be missing their whole life, right?
Yeah. But like, do they know that's missing? Like, what would they gain if they had? I have no idea. Maybe.
They're probably going to suffer during the act at least, right? I guess the question then becomes, do the potential benefits outweigh the suffering, maybe, if you're looking at it based on utilitarianism, right? I am likely to say they are harmed, but it's whether or not the harm is outweighed, maybe. to wrap up, Svoboda does not look favorably upon this procedure, as you could probably guess from everything that we've talked about today. He concludes the article by arguing that this procedure should not be done to infant males. Males should be able to decide later if they want to do it, when an informed consent can be established, when they can actually make the decision. And he would like us to see education and our culture in the United States change. Because he thinks that this practice, which is so widespread, is something that people don't even give a second thought to. It's something that isn't even on people's radar. But he thinks, due to the estimates that it's killing about 100 boys a year, and those who do undergo this procedure, which he thinks can be traumatic in a lot of cases, it's not good. We should not be doing it unless the person consents to it. So think about circumcision in your own life. Do you want your kids to be circumcised or no? Do you want them to be able to make their own decision about this or no? If you have kids, if you have boys, males, you're going to have to answer this question. So, anyway, thank you for coming. I will see you on Tuesday. I believe we have a discussion day, right? Excellent. So come with your questions and we'll work through them, all right?